Daniel, you saw this developing for many months, and you had a blog, the Somewhere Left of Ottawa blog, that you produced back at the end of March under the headline Consolidation and Fragmentation. The success of the Liberals in 2025 depends a lot on the weakness of the NDP. And that really was the story of the election on April 28th, that the Liberals were able to attract enough NDP voters to really form power and block the Conservatives from power.
Yeah, so I think we saw in this campaign kind of two things, both that happened before the election was called, that really mattered. One was the resignation of Justin Trudeau and his replacement with Mark Carney. I think across the board, because Trudeau was unpopular, that helped pull some votes to the Liberals. And then the big thing that I think affects the New Democrats is the election of Donald Trump and the subsequent tariffs and 51st state threats. And it was those particular moments where NDP support collapsed. And then nothing really moved after that. And my kind of instinct from that is that it was this threat from the United States, this question of who do you want respond to that threat, that moved a lot of voters from the NDP over to the Liberals. The problem for the NDP in this election is, if the main question is who do you want to deal with the United States and Donald Trump, well, the answer to that question is not Jagmeet Singh, just because you know Jagmeet Singh's not going to be the prime minister. And in that kind of context, I mean, it was very, very difficult for the NDP to get attention paid to its issues. The English leaders debate, I think, becomes an important metaphor here. You saw the number of times Singh was interrupting. To me, that's an indication or a metaphor for a campaign in which the NDP really had to fight to get attention paid to it, and often would lose that battle to try to get attention paid to the issues that were important to it.
Contradiction in many ways that Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada governor, former Bank of England governor, who became the chair of Brookfield Asset Management, which has $1 trillion worth of assets, heavily involved in real estate, heavily involved also in other investments around the world, including private healthcare. Yet NDP voters decided to put their vote with Mark Carney's candidates instead of Pierre Poilievre's candidates. Is this just an anomaly, or do you think that the NDP itself has given voters a reason to rethink their priorities?
Yeah, so I think this may be some of the good news coming out of the election for the NDP, or the reasons to be optimistic, in that this was a Liberal Party. I think you mentioned the biography of Carney, but also, I mean, the first two things he does after becoming prime minister is get rid of the carbon tax and cut a corporate tax increase. These are not the kind of things that pull left-leaning voters over to a party. And indeed, I think are indications that the Liberal Party has shifted right and left space on the left for a party like the NDP to be successful. And so the good news there is that points to something that's idiosyncratic to this election, hurting the NDP. If the NDP and Canadian politics can get beyond dealing with Trump, the United States, all of that stuff, maybe those left-wing voters go back to the New Democrats. And that's a good reason to be optimistic. The reason to be pessimistic is that you've got, they've lost official party status and you lose resources as a result. The Poilievre threat is there. I don't want to diminish it. In places like Windsor, the NDP probably lost some votes to the Conservatives. But I think the Liberal threat is larger. I think it's certainly the case that you're going to have some unionized voters in the private sector and, say, the construction industry shifting over to the Conservatives. But if we look at where the NDP is successful in the last couple of elections, it's in places like British Columbia. It's in quite progressive places. And so I think the Liberals are the greater threat in those kinds of ridings, even if the NDP is losing some support to the Conservatives.